How's it going, everyone? My name is Devon from Debo's Fishing, and today I'm going to take you through the entire process of painting a crankbait. This is going to be kind of a quick overview, but if you've got any specific questions on each of these little parts, we've made dedicated videos on each one of those and how we do it series, so be sure to check that out. But today, to get started, we've got some of the Do It crankbait blanks. Open up one of these, and this happens to be a jerk bait. We're going to do kind of a fun perch pattern on this today. Again, the nice part about these are the bill's already masked for you, so you don't need to do anything there. Now this is transparent. You can do a transparent pattern if you want, but I'm going to put a quick coat of white on here as my base and get started. Okay, I got my brush loaded up with some white. I've got my PSI set on 30. That's usually where I do most of my spraying. Again, making sure it's spray pressure at 30 PSI, and then I'm going to control the paint with my actual trigger here. So to get started, and go ahead and get a white base coat on here. Okay, just throwing a glove on here. And another thing to note about your spraying is the distance at which you're spraying. When you're spraying at a lower pressure, trying to get detail, it's often good to get in close to that. But like when I'm doing this and putting a coat on, I often hold it out just a little bit farther, and it gives kind of more of that mist coat to it. That way it all kind of blends in together. So remember, you can vary the look of the paint depending on how close or how far you have your brush from it. Okay, I've got my white base coat on. I'm going to add just a little bit of yellow, and this is going to be covered up a lot of it. I know it seems pretty bright, but a lot of this will get covered up with detail and scale texture, so just adds another dimension. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of the Disco Shad Pearlized paint. Now, if you've got questions on, what all these paints are, what they do, the pearl versus the original versus the transparent, we've got a completely separate video that goes completely in depth on all of that. So I'm going to add some of this to the bottom, kind of up at a slight angle. I don't want to get the very belly of this. That's white on a perch, so I'm going to spray this kind of at an angle up. That's another thing with airbrushing. As you're adding different layers, hitting different angles will give a really neat look as you're spraying instead of spraying just straight on with every color. Try angling off your paints. Okay, I'm going to add a transparent green now. This is Northern Lights Lime, and I like to work from lighter colors to darker colors. It's easier for me to see the light colors first, and as I'm adding the layers, work up to that dark stuff, because once you get a dark color down, it's really hard to cover that up, So if you've got the light colors and you make a little bit of a mistake, you can always cover that up with something a little darker. So as I go over this and paint each side, I'm always checking each side to make sure it's symmetrical. It's really hard to do, in certain lights and such. It's one of the tougher parts of painting a crankbait, making sure each side looks exactly the same. But with enough practice, you will get it. Okay, so I just got all of this heat set with my heat gun again. Before you lay this down on any sort of surface, I'm going to be doing some scale work. And Do It has this all for sale, just a simple scale mesh pattern. And then these little craft rings are awesome for this, for sending it on instead of having to wrap it. You can do it that way too, put the scale on and then use clips to get it real tight. But for what I'm doing, I'm just going to add some simple scales, and this works awesome for it. Spray each side, move on. So new surface, I'm going to put this on and I'm going to spray this at an angle. That's one big thing for your scales, to give them a 3D dimension. Instead of spraying straight on this like so, I'm going to spray at like maybe a 45-degree angle, and it's going to give kind of that shadowing taper effect. I'll show you. Okay, so I just got that sprayed, and before I lift this up, there's wet paint on here. I don't want to accidentally move my stencil across it or my netting and smear that. So I'm going to heat set before I move any of this. I'm going to keep it all held tight. Okay, so as I was spraying that, I've got a reference picture here, and I keep kind of checking my reference, looking at the jerk bait, making sure everything is kind of looking the same, my colors are matching. You can always go in and fix it, but while you've got that netting on there, remember that once you take it off, it is a huge pain to try to put that on there and match it again. So usually you've got one shot to get your darkness right. So double check your reference and keep going. Okay, I'm going to paint the top on the back of this bait just to kind of blend it into some of those scales before I get to the darker stuff. I'm actually going to mix some colors to try to achieve that darker green perch, kind of the side stripe part. So to achieve the darker stripes on this perch, I don't have a color that's gonna exactly match that. So I'm gonna get kind of fun with this. I'm gonna mix some of the color I was already using. This is important because we'll blend into this, some of this watermelon. And I'm gonna mix some shad back black into it. This is an iridescent. It's gonna kind of give it that pearly, glittery kind of look to it. And it looks really nice when you've got it contrasting against some of these solid colors and then some of the glitter colors that are layered underneath. Okay, now when you're adding black or a darker color to any sort of color that you're mixing in a cup, be careful because just a couple of this drops, this stuff goes a long ways. So add a little bit at a time and keep checking it. Now as you're spraying this, I'll start to load it into my gun when I think I'm close. Spray it on a piece of paper or paper towel or something and check your colors, and remember it will dry just a little bit darker than it looks in the cup. All right, we're at the point now, we're ready to use our stencil and put the perch stripes on the side of this. Really cool, the stencils are a great way to add any sort of these where you want kind of a hard line, and you can always use a texturing to kind of blend that in later, but the perch is one of those, I do like the good hard lines on the side stripes. So we're gonna put this on the side here, make sure there's no paint. There was a little bit of paint there, by golly. And put this on here and get this in. Now, you notice in the cup, this doesn't look too dark. I got a new piece of paper here to paint on because I was testing my color, and when you put this on paper, it's quite a bit darker than it looks, and it's almost like a greenish black, I guess you'd call it. That's what we've got going on here. We're gonna test this on the paper once again. Blend the stripes up into the back of it, and it's gonna start looking a lot more like a perch. You can see there when I start layering that on how dark that green is compared to the almost like an army-ish looking green inside here. Okay, now another big thing with stencils, and I still struggle to this, I've been painting for a few years now, and making sure it's symmetrical on each side, meaning this stripe is X amount away from the head of the bait and X amount from the top of the bait, because if you've got one, let's say right against the gill on this side, then I flip it over, and I flip this over and I get it too far back. When you look at it from the top, your stripes are gonna kind of be off center. It's not a huge deal, but if you're kind of a perfectionist like I am, you wanna try to get them to match. So use a reference point on the bait. So I'm gonna use the back of the gill plate on this, and then I'm gonna look at the back part, the back hook hanger, to match it up with one of these stripes in the back, and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So I can see my gill plate right here. I'm gonna get just behind it. And remember, as you're spraying on your stencil, you're gonna try to hit kind of the sides of the stencil. You don't wanna spray straight down into your bait and get that paint under the stencil. Light layers. You can keep going back over it. You don't want it to all clump up and get like a pool of paint in there. Okay, really careful as I take this off. Boom, now that looks so much more like a perch. And make sure when you peel your stencil off to peel it away from your work. Don't like move it to the side or anything where you're gonna smudge it. Take it completely off. And another thing, when I was holding this down, I was pushing down on the front and spraying toward the part that's tight. Remember, I don't want to get up under that, and then it's going to kind of look all blurry and such. To get good crisp lines like that, hold it nice and tight on there. Okay, so we're going to add some detail work using the new stencils from Do It. I'm going to add some red kind of gills to this and some like a splatter. It's a really cool little pattern they've got here. Going to add some orange fins on the bottom, of course, for the perch, and then just an orange dot on the back. So let's go through that. So the fun part about painting is the detail we have here for the gill, kind of the bloody, the red gill look behind, and then kind of the spatters. It's not gonna line up exactly with this, but once you get it on the bait, it will be kind of a cool, different look behind it. And this is one of the times I wanna get a little bit closer to my stencil, and I'm gonna use just a little bit of paint. So remember, the more you pull back on the trigger, more paint's gonna spit out. I'm gonna just barely pull back so I can do these fine details. Okay, so we're gonna go into a little bit of orange, and on my stencil here, I've got some little tiny fins that we're gonna use for the front fins on the bottom for the perch. Now they've also got some orange on the back, but instead of doing fins, it's real small back here and kind of hard to do that detail. I'm just gonna put a round circle of orange where this back hook hanger is, and it kind of gives them a focal point if that fish is coming up under it. At least it's giving them something to kind of target onto. Okay, the final step of this, I'm going to add some splatter to the back of the jerkbait, which is a kind of fun, interesting way to add texture. And really all I'm going to do is take my brush and just flick the trigger just like this. And it's going to add a bunch of little like speckles and spots. No sort of perfect pattern, you know, like a fish, the scales and little spots they have are never perfect. So it's a fun way to add it. This is a shad back black, which is interesting because it's that pearly kind of iridescent. So when you get this in the light, and especially when you get the clear coat on it, those really shine and pop. One last step with the black, I'm going to outline the eyes. So when I put the 3D eyes in there, it kind of gives that black contrast against the outside of the eye. Okay, so for the final step before the clear coat process, we're gonna add some of these Hyper HD eyes, and these are some of the coolest eyes out on the market. This is the perfect perch meant to mimic a perch, exactly. So really neat eyes that give you both the left and right side, which I like. That way, the eyes are looking the same way on each side. I know it's a little thing, but hey, I like the little details. So I'm gonna use a pair of tweezers to put these on, and a good point of reference with the eye is usually the eye will have kind of a point to it, and the point on most species is gonna go forwards. That way, I know when you're looking at the eye, you know, which way does this thing go? Use that point as your forward reference. All right, so the last step to finish up this lure is to get the clear coat on, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. You know, the red gill, kind of bleeding gill looks cool, and the black speckle, all that will really come out at like, it's like a 3D magnification once you get that clear coat on there. So I hope you enjoyed the process, start to finish, of painting a crankbait. I know some of this we went through kind of quick, but always remember we've got more in-depth videos on every part of this process from start to finish, and the How We Do It series on the Do It YouTube channel. So stay tuned for more, and thanks for watching.